So hope you are not too tired and you enjoyed the interesting talk by Carolina and inferring the challenge from the probability of the animal being in a bad day or good day. So now we are looking at the same problem from a different perspective. Again, we don't have the challenge level, and we want to see if we can infer that or estimate that based on the farm effect. So this was the equation you saw before, and this t was estimated in the previous session by a probability, and then the probability was put over there, and the rest of the stuff was calculated. Now here, we assume that we don't have the t, but we have something else. We have, for example, the farm effect or the group number of the animal that comes from. So this is a non-genetic factor that categorizes the challenge level. And then we assume that, like probability, all the animals within the same farm are exposed to exactly similar challenge. This is a little bit not true because animals in the same farm may be a little bit more or less exposed to challenge. But here we assume, because we don't have any other way, we calculate one farm effect and we say all the animals in this farm are exposed to this challenge. And then again, we have our fundamental assumption that the realized performance of the animal in general decreases as the challenge increases. You will see how this will come to play later on. And then here I would need to define to you what is the extent of the farm or the heterogeneity of the farm. So imagine that this axis shows you the challenge level that exists from our data set that comes, for example, from the country. And different shades of green here are different farms that exist. So we have some data from this farm, some data from this, and some data from the other farms. And later on, we want to change the length of the shaded green and see how this will affect the accuracy of the breeding values. And the reason we do that is because, in reality, we don't know the challenge level, right? So we need to infer it. We need to estimate it, for example, from the farm effect. And we want to know if this will have a very bad effect on the accuracies, and if basically the extent of the farms will be so much that we can completely forget about estimating the breeding values for resilience in this way. Okay, so the method that we are going to use is the two-step reaction norm. So what you do is basically you start with the model that you model a mean for all the individuals, a farm effect, a breeding value, that is the additive genetic breeding value, and a residual. And you can drop the A actually if you want, and you will end up with Finkelney-Wilkinson that was provided a long time ago for plants. Now, as you probably remember, Andres mentioned that the F here is probably going to have genetic effect. And what you're doing now, I'm going to use this farm later on as the level of the challenge that the animal is exposed to. You're kind of bringing genetics from here and putting it as a challenge level. However, if the distribution of the phenotype is random, and I will refer to the previous talk that was in the morning, you can have different distribution of animals. One is with assortative, clustered, and random, and this was when farmers don't contribute, they have their own group of animals, or when there is artificial insemination or sire reference schemes. And basically, if you have the distribution of the phenotypes is random, this sentence needs to be corrected. The average genetic effect in F is going to be 0. Now, we will estimate the farm effects from this model, and then we are going to scale that and put it here, and then calculate the other 6 terms. So this is basically the overall way how to go about this model. And the way we're going to scale this F hat, capital F, into F is basically using our assumption. So we assumed that the animals at the best farm are going to be exposed to the lowest challenge, and animals in the worst farm, basically that animals that produce less are exposed to more challenge. So this way, if I calculate my farm effects, and say the maximum farm effect is attributed to the lowest challenge, and the minimum farm is attributed to the highest challenge, and say that because I assume that at 0 challenge is the potential production of the animal, this will have to be eventually 0. I can scale my f into the small f, which I'm going to use for the reaction norm model. Now, you see that Andres talked about Legendre polynomials, and you can actually choose not to scale this way. Now, the implication of not using this scale or using Legendre polynomial is actually quite high. So what happens if you scale differently is you are going to have different genetic correlation or even different breeding values. However, remember that our fundamental assumption was animals in general reduce production when challenge is high. So you need to have this scaling to honor that assumption. Okay, so all the animals basically, when you have like 10 farms and 1,000 animals, so all the animals in each of the 10 farms are going to get the same challenge level. So at the end, you will end up with only 10 farm effects. And so all the animals in each farm will be assigned with the same challenge level. Now, as I mentioned earlier, farms can have different variability. For example, in a farm that is managed very well, all the animals are more or less treated similarly. So you have smaller range of farms. In farms that are not managed very well, so there is discrimination between animals, and then they are basically the level of challenge for each farm is kind of longer. So we define here the heterogeneity of the farm, which is basically the range of the challenge level within a farm divided by the range of challenge levels that exist in all of your data. And this is basically a fraction that is anything between 1 to 0. 0 means you know exactly how much challenge each animal experiences, which is the ideal scenario and probably doesn't happen. And 1 is basically where you have no information of the farms for no animal. So 1 and 0 are the extreme. But we will look at 2 values in the exercise. So basically, this is the result if you have different heterogeneity for the farm effects, and this is the heterogeneity of 0, or where you know exactly how much each animal experiences the challenge. So you will see in general the accuracies for both production and potential and resilience drop. However, if you remember from the previous session, we can divide animals into different distribution. The distribution of the phenotypes for animal can be different depending whether you use artificial insemination and so on. And here you see that the random case is always at the top of the other 3 cases, at least for production potential. So basically, yes, the higher heterogeneity will cause a drop of accuracy. But if you are in the scenario where you have a random distribution of genotypes across different environments, you can maintain quite high production, even when you are at the heterogeneity of 0.3. So yes, that was what I wanted to share with you. And now we want to go and do the rest of the exercises, and the exercises also that are there for the not unknown challenge level. Do you have any questions? Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, so again, we don't need to do the BLOP F90 thing. I will just walk you through the exercises that we did. So just to wrap up, we did first this exercise using genomic and pedigree information. We have our master file, which looks like this. So in the previous exercise, we used only the low heterogeneity of challenge level and Y. and we estimated the breeding values using genomic and pedigree, and we got the accuracy of, for genomic breeding values and the EBVs estimated from pedigree for resilience and production potential, and we saw that with genomic we increased the accuracy for breeding values. Now, here I want, this was the second exercise from the morning that we left. Here I want to use, compare this model and compare these breeding values and the gain I obtained by using this breeding value for selection comparing to the previous model. So again, because now I don't know if I can have both of them at the same page. So basically, for the fitting the mean, I just will need a 1. So basically, I'm filtering my data to have a 1, to have the ID of the individuals and their farm that comes from the master file data, and then the breeding values, which comes as the ID of the individuals. So with this data file, I will write it. You can try this at home. I will write it at the disk and then run the blobf90. We are not doing it at the moment. And we get a solution file, which we call it farmlow at this instance. And then the solution file here basically gives me all the fixed effects for the farms. So I have 10 farms here. I have 10 farms and 3,300 individuals. I'm not interested for the moment on the farm effects. So I'm going to skip the farm effects and only keep the 3,300 EBVs for the individuals. This comes from the previous exercise that we did a genomic evaluation, and I'm going to only keep the breeding values. Now, if you remember, our pedigree structure contains of 3 generations. So we will basically use the estimation for the 3rd generation based on one selection criteria, take those individuals and say, okay, based on this selection criteria, how much are we gaining in, let's say, resilience or production potential? So here, basically, I'm chopping the data, taking the 3rd generation, which I call candidates, based on the candidate breeding values when not using a reaction norm, so without reaction norm. And then basically candidate GEBV when I use a reaction norm for resilience, and candidate GEBV for production potential. And then basically with order, I am taking the top, I'm sorting here the candidate GEBV, and then based on that index, I'm selecting only the top, let's say, 10%. So we'll get a number here, but I'll get back to that number later on. Let's see the plots first. So this code is all doing is producing these plots, which is these 2 scenarios. So let's look at these 2 plots first. I'm here doing a genomic evaluation without random regression, and I'm using the top 10%. So based on the GEBV that I get for the model that has the farm effect, I'm using the top 10% that are on this side. Now, if you see the top percent, of course, they are on the right, because on the x-axis, I have the GEBV of the animals. On the y-axis, I have the true breeding value for production potential. Now, if you see, I don't know if it's clear or not, but majority of these blue lines, who are the selected individuals, are above 0. And this means that I'm gaining in production potential, P0. But for PR resilience, the majority of the blue lines are above this line of 0, which means that I'm most likely reducing resilience. And actually, it is true. If we look at the quantitative numbers for this, we will see that we are increasing the production potential by 0.2, but we are reducing resilience by 0.08. In the other scenario, where we do a reaction norm analysis, we get 2 breeding values for each individual. one breeding value for resilience, and one breeding value for production potential. And they are negatively, and in this case, we simulated a negative genetic correlation between resilience and production potential. Now, what happens if I select based on the GEBV of the production potential? Of course, I'm going to have a positive gain here because the majority of these blue lines are above 0. I'm going to have a positive gain in the production potential. However, because we have a negative genetic correlation, I'm going to have a loss in resilience. Well, we expected that. But we know already beforehand that if we choose these individuals, we are going to lose resilience, and the reverse. If we choose the ones that are best for resilience, then we are going to have a loss of production potential. However, there is more we can do with these two. With this, we are already done. We cannot do anything. We choose the best animals, and we already lost resilience. Now, if I use a selection index, which means that I combine these two into a selection index, we don't know what values to choose alpha and beta, what values to choose for alpha and beta. It depends on the user case and on the economical value you define for resilience and production potential. So we just basically vary alpha from 0 to 1 and vary beta from 1 to 0, like basically write beta as 1 minus alpha, and then let alpha go from 0 to 1. And look at the production potential. So here I'm just doing this into loop with the selection index going from 0 to 1 in 20 steps, and calculating the mean for the chosen candidates to see if they have a genetic gain or if they have a genetic loss. So here is what I see based on the breeding value, based on the GEBVs that I have. So the weight for resilience is this alpha. So I'm calling this alpha, which is the weight for the resilience. And basically, this one is 1 minus alpha. So whenever this is 0, this one is 1. And whenever this is 1, this one is 0. So in this case, choosing individuals based on a resilience weight of 0 means that I'm totally going for production potential. So I will have a gain in production potential and a negative loss in resilience. And then as I choose this, I will have obviously a more gain for the other trait and will eventually end up with a loss for resilience based on the estimated genetic gain. Now, using the true genetic gain, so this is only looking at the EBVZ of the individual. But this was a simulated data, and I had the liberty of also looking at the true genetic gain. I see that the same is also happening. It's a little bit distorted because our accuracies are low. But basically, we see that we have a variety of options to choose from, and we can basically improve both genetic gain for both resilience and intercept if we have an index of, let's say, 0.62. OK, any questions here so far? OK, so in the next exercise, I am going to assume that I do not have the challenge levels, but I only have the farm effects. So in the master data, I'm going to, in this file, I'm going to remove the X and only keep farm. So I will have ID of the individuals, farm of the individuals, and only their Y. Only these 3 columns. So we did that already with exercise 2. So assuming that exercise 2 is already done, this was actually the same model that was fitted for exercise 2. So I'm using the exercise 2 solution. However, now I'm actually interested in the farm effects. Before, I was only interested into the breeding values. Here, I only want the farm effects, which is the 10 top lines of the solution file. And then we need to scale the farms, as I said earlier, because if we don't do this scaling, then we have not followed our own assumptions. So we get the farm effects scaled, and then we can replace these farm effects of the farm. So what we get here is now these estimated X values, which are basically on the farm effects. So now I have these environments that are estimated based on the challenge each individual, based on the mean production of a group of animals inside the farm. So again, this needs to be run with blobf90 to estimate the variance components and the breeding values for each individual. And then we need to do this all over again, but with a medium heterogeneity. So everything until now was only done for low heterogeneity. So now we want to do the medium heterogeneity. So I have done it for you, and you can use the solution files, but the parameter files are also there. So if you feel you want to do it by yourself, you're more welcome to do. And then this plot shows you the accuracy of the resilience based on the assumption that we know the challenge level, we have the highest accuracy. We don't know the challenge level, but our farm comes from a low heterogeneity, or the challenge levels in the farms are low heterogeneous and medium heterogeneous. There is also another way you can calculate this using the method, the Bayesian method that Andres mentioned. So this will basically calculate the farm effects and the breeding values at the same time. Okay, any question? Okay, thank you.